make their own comments. The EU is highly bureaucratic, highly expensive, and no matter what anybody says, it costs money. I'll get straight to the chase. Procurement. EU Consolidated Public Procurement Directive, adopted in January 26, 2006, gives detailed instructions on how public procurement exercises should be carried out. These are complex. This is from our own website. Complex equals expensive. Failure to adhere to the directive can result in council becoming subject to court action or enforcement by the EU. It can well be the case that these costs will then be passed on to council taxpayers. Waste and recycling, I know it's a favourite of everybody's, and it's a constant battle to keep the weekly bin collections. The Recycling of Hazardous Waste Directive, which is 91689 EC, requires substantial investment in new recycling technologies. Combine that with the Waste Electrical and Electronic Equipment Directive, 2003-108 EC, and that leads to higher disposal costs, which also are passed on to taxpayers. And in the Landfill Directive, 9931 EC, and you'll probably get used to these numbers because there's a few more of them coming, commit councils to reducing landfill to half of what it was in 1995, or face massive fines. This is indeed what led some councils to go to fortnightly bin collections and not retain the weekly ones. Just as a helpful addendum to that, the EU suggested that a way to help with this is to build more incinerators, which is great. You know, that's everybody having an incinerator down the road to help keep the costs down for the landfill. Fantastic. Thank you, EU. Loss of freedom. The EU publishes energy efficiency guidelines in public tender contracts, forcing suppliers to provide energy use statistics, compulsory energy audits, and directing councils to purchase vehicles and equipment from a list of approved product specifications. The EU applies similarly stringent rules to the purchase and rent of buildings. Needless to say, is a whole raft of costly bureaucracy which is required to enforce those regulations, and it reduces the ability of local councils to set standards they deem appropriate for local communities. This is yet another example of again and again the EU interfering with local democracy and just driving up the costs generally. I mean, I could go on with, there's loads more of that stuff. At the moment, the EU is trying to introduce the EU regulation of Port Services Directive. Whilst that doesn't directly affect the council's cost, if implemented, and like these EU regulations they always seem to be, this will interfere in our ports. It will introduce regulation, it will introduce bureaucracy, which is not required. Our ports are by and large in the private sector, and they are efficient. These regulations, if they're pushed through, could have a seriously damaging effect on our ports, which would affect investment into our borough and potential future jobs. And again, because I really want to get to debate, just in case anybody's considering using the argument that, well, we get loads of money back from the EU. Well, we do get some money back from the EU, but I can give you that in the last Parliament alone, the total austerity cuts implemented by the government at the time came to, that's across all of government, came to £36 billion. Over that same period, we gave the EU £87 billion, over twice as much. So when we're talking about all the austerity cuts and the reducing revenue support grant, we should remember this. We are giving away this money to the EU. We could keep this ourselves, and you make better use of it here in Thurrock.
Thank you, Councillor Snell. When I first read this, I thought, yeah, definitely the right one to agree. Then I thought about it a little bit longer. I thought, how much do we actually get from the EU? So I contacted the Section 151 officer who sent me a report with the one going to Cabinet only a few weeks earlier, which outlined millions here, tens of millions there, 100 millions there, but across wide areas, not just for Thurrock, but obviously to improve infrastructure over a much wider area. So I also asked, how much do we pay them? The response was shocking. The response was, we cannot estimate how much we pay to the EU and how much bureaucracy there is. Which is very open and candid of Sean, and I really thank him, because if there was ever a statement that was going to reinforce my thought to say, yes, this is the right motion to back, it was that. When, you know, one of the officers that I truly rate as a really good, open, honest officer, really cannot stuck to give a good answer. So thank you very much, Mr. Clark, for helping me with my decision in that. And obviously I talk for myself, I can't talk for the Conservative Party or indeed the Conservative group locally. It's a free vote, they can all vote however they wish. But it's got to be wrong that we have to advertise out large contracts across the entire EU just because it's deemed to be fair. Should we really put out, for instance, a large tender for transport services for children to school, only to have a company from Greece say, well, we wasn't given a fair crack of the whip on this one, and we think it's wrong, and then for our taxpayers to lose out. You know, what's the turnaround time from Athens to here for a taxi? And sometimes quicker than some of our local services, I would have thought, but we move swiftly on. I'm a regular visitor to Brussels. I go as often as I can, certainly at Christmas, and it's very stark to see over here. You wouldn't see an open brazier at a market with people, roasting marshmallows, etc. in there. In the streets of Brussels, not an uncommon sight during the Christmas period. So you think, how comes they won't agree to the rules that are set in their own town, yet we are hog-tied on regular occasions with directives after directive after directive? Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will obviously continue to be supportive of this motion. It is a shame that there's nothing to come out of it. Unfortunately, the council doesn't get a vote when it comes to it. I think that sums everything up in relation to this quite good and adequate motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bird.
The absurdity, if you want a demonstration, look outside Grays railway station where they're advertising Scotch beef from European, and you think that's their brand, that's their stamp, if you like, of saying everything that we have our tentacles on has got to have our name and our brand on. As I say, outside Grays railway station, you can see an advertisement advertising Scotch beef, but it's not from Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hamilton. Councillor Ray?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. When I first looked at this, I thought, well, actually, what's this got to do with Thurrock Council? I mean, if it had started off and talking about self-determination and the right to rule ourselves and the right to govern ourselves, I could understand that quite well. But the main thing that I find, and this is probably one of the reasons I get a great worry about this, particularly with the 2 groups or 3 groups or even 4 groups that are trying to lead the referendum campaign, is precisely the fact that we just had here Councillor Snell stand up. He went into a load of rambling. He went on about what we're going to do with the electorate, what we're going to do with this, that and the other. Well, actually the question is, what would you do with the electorates? What would you do with the landfill? What would you do with the other regulations? Because we all know that the way government works, there's no way they would get rid of the landfill tax or anything else. It's no good then turning around and saying, well, the UKIP government would, because that's not going to happen. I would bet £100 now, that's not going to happen anytime soon. But the main thing is that I feel that, yes, we should pull out of the EU. But I think a little bit more explaining from the 2 groups might mean that most people would then become more and more assured of what they're actually voting for, because you hear it so often that ordinary folk, you hear it on the radio, you hear it on the news, where people turn around and say, well, we don't know what it's about. So perhaps if certain particular parties actually got down to the nitty-gritty, we might find out, or the people of Thurrock might find out what it's really about. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Madam Mayor, I'm going to go about this at a different angle in respect of companies that want to work for council and all the laws and regulations that really basically hold them up, because it's a minefield. For instance, when I read Councillor Lynn Worrell's report on housing, one line that really stuck out like sore thumb, and it read, 20% of supply chain partners are registered in Thurrock. Really? Only 20%? As a local councillor who supports residents and companies of Thurrock, I would like to see that up around to 50%. But we all know that 70% of all rules, laws, regulation coming as a directive from this unelected institution called the European Union, it makes it almost impossible for local tradesmen and companies to tender for work at council. So council has no choice but to deal with large multi-corporations. This is what this EU stands for. Large multi-corporations taking over smaller companies, then becoming cartels. They're not worried about the medium-sized businesses anymore. This pushes the cost up the council. Why? Because only a small number of UK companies trade with the EU. But all UK companies have to comply with the same expensive regulations. Now, I'm going to give you a little example, Madam Mayor. A lot of people in here know that I've got a contact with a local window manufacturer and installation company. For him to carry out work, right, for council, he will have to download loads and loads of paperwork, fill this stuff all in. Then he's got to join up at a great yearly cost to somebody in Europe, and that's just for tendering. Now this company, we all know, is owned and operated by the founder member of UKIP in Thurrock. And I'd like to dispel a little rumour, and notice was stated by the outgoing member for Aveley and Uplands, who said he founded UKIP locally. So let's put that to rest. And as an example, an elderly lady, a resident of my ward, she requested to have a window changed because she was too frail to reach the top opening. The request was turned down, Madam Mayor, because the cost was too much. It was £2,000. I got that quoted by the local company, and to make it and install it was just over £400. And it could have been done, within 2 days. I did the same thing with a door. That took 12 weeks to change at an astronomical cost. It could have been done locally, with all your figures for your heating. So anyway, that's the way I'm going for it. Thank you.
I'm very excited. I wasn't going to speak on the side tonight because I kind of anticipated it being a debate that would infuriate me, and it has done so far. But since my last meeting, I've indulged myself. I'd first of all like to say I'm very much looking forward to Graham explaining when he sums up what he's going to do about the landfills, as he was asked by Councillor Jones, and I think we're all looking forward very much to hearing his statement on that. I would just say, I will be voting against the motion. We have a free vote on this side and people are voting on different ways. But what we've talked about thus far is slightly comparing apples and oranges. We talked about the meeting, the item that came to the Cabinet meeting last month in which we set out the European funding. There was actually millions of pounds of the funding that comes directly into Thurrock from European structural funds. It supports things like community development in Tilbury, it supports things like skills development, it supports things like greening local businesses, and it supports the work that we're doing around the creative and cultural hub. So it's slightly disingenuous to suggest that no money comes directly here. The other point that I'd like to raise is that we seem to be comparing, there's a certain amount of apples and oranges going on here, in which that you say, we can't quantify the amount of money that we spend into the EU. You can't, in many, many ways, quantify the money that comes back into this country from the EU. I look at Thurrock, and I've been knocking on doors here for many, many years now, and I'm always surprised at the very high level of Euroscepticism I seem to see in this borough. We've got 2 international ports, we've got tens of thousands of workers who work in the retail and logistics business, all of whom depend on Europe's future, on Britain's future as a trading nation, which is very much supported by our membership of the EU. You look at companies, and I'll name Procter & Gamble as an example here, but I'm sure there are others for whom the Thurrock facilities that employ hundreds and hundreds of people locally are part of a wider European network that will not be unstitched easily on the 23rd of June. You know, I would very much agree with many things that people have said here, that the EU is very, 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 very far away from being a perfect institution. But it is, in my opinion, and I'm sure the opinion of other members in this chamber, the best vehicle that we have at the moment to ensure the prosperity and the security of many of the people that we're elected to represent.
I shall personally be voting to leave the EU, but I can't really support this motion. I looked up the definition of a referendum, and it quite clearly says a vote in which all the people in a country or an area are asked to give their opinion about or decide an important political or social question. It's got nothing to do with this chamber, and I just get the feeling that with this motion, I'm afraid, Councillor Snell, you're just gesticulating and trying to justify your party's existence, as it was the Conservative Party that's given this referendum. So I think that's all you're doing. But I do reiterate that I personally will be leaving the EU, but this vote is for individual people to make. I am.
this motion, but from the outset I'll say that I will be definitely voting against it. Although I do believe that seeking the UK's withdrawal from the EU is an honourable view to hold, I do find the the timing of this motion unfortunate. Placing it at the end of the final meeting of the municipal year could be seen as an attempt to turn it into an issue for the local elections. And as we all know, our membership of the EU will not be on the ballot paper on the 5th of May. What will be on the ballot paper is an administration that since 2010 has provided sound leadership and stability to this council, an administration which is building homes and supporting schools, an administration which is renovating Seabrook Rise and regenerating the High Street. And all of this is being done and has been achieved whilst incidentally being within the European Union. So, as I said earlier, supporting Brexit is an entirely honourable and profitable position to hold. I do believe, however, that it is completely wrong. I don't think that Thurrock will be better off if we leave the European Union on the 23rd of June. No one can say where the money lost from the EU funding into Thurrock will come from. That's confirmed on here by the section 151 comments. And with the budget we've just had from the government, I don't trust them to step in either. So with the lack of certainty over the positive benefits we receive from the European Union, and with a lack of certainty about what will replace it, there is only one way, in my opinion, to be able to vote on this motion. As other members have said, even members who are supportive of our membership of the European Union have said it's not a perfect organisation. I don't know of any perfect organisation, any perfect unit or organisational unit within society, but I do think that for a Great Britain and a stronger Thurrock, we are better off within and not without the European Union. So I thank you.
There's been a lot of talk about money tonight, and I was really interested in Sean's observations that they just don't know about the amount of money going out there. And I was interested in what Councillor Spade had to say, but I just really want to make it really nice and easy. Like, you give me 85 quid, I'll give you back 36 and I'll tell you how to spend it. All right.
A lot of certainty and uncertainty in terms of being bandied about, and the whole debate is about uncertainty, because no major country within the European Union has left. But also, there is a level of uncertainty of staying in. Remember, this is an institution whose sole motivation is ever closer union. In the debates between Nigel Farage and Nick Clegg called it ridiculous to even think of the concept of a European army. But already there are plans and support within the European Parliament to create that European army. We hear talk of a European Coast Guard. We are reaping the consequences of a European migration and refugee policy that has broken the Dublin Conventions. And I hadn't thought that I would be making these points, but the past 36 hours have been horrible for the European Union. You can't put into words the fear of knowing that an explosion has happened and people have died just down the road. And that is what happened. And when you receive a communication saying stay in your rooms, you hear the airport has been attacked, the train stations around the Commission have been attacked, what do you think is next? And that is the main focus that we will find ourselves in this referendum debate. I shall be voting for this motion, but in the wider scheme, it will be about security. Do we feel safer handing over more powers to an institution that the supporters of the European Union have already said is not perfect? Or do we face the uncertain future, devolving power back down to national governments and becoming a global player once again? Why aren't we creating our own trade deals with the Commonwealth? Why aren't we able to negotiate our own trade deals? Why are we targeting ourselves to an economic bloc that is shrinking? This is a decision whether the British people want power to be here or hand it over to an imperfect institution in an uncertain future. I'd rather we face those uncertain times with power in this country rather than